My name is Matt. I'm one of the co-pastors here, and if you haven't been around for this series before, part of what we've always tried to budget into the 6 or 8 weeks, however long it lasts, is at some point a few weekends, a couple weekends, where we expand the dialogue beyond just our teaching team, and we either invite someone from the outside of Watershed, or even folks within Watershed who might have a particular experience or perspective that we feel like, man, if our community could hear them discuss this or dialogue over it, like how good would that be? And so this morning is a version of that. And I'm really excited because the folks that you're going to hear from have this long history with them over the past 10 years, kind of this spread out over the course of 10 years in various ways. We've been together relationally. We've co-led or co-worked, kind of shared some working relationships in terms of initiatives here, and they're going to be coming in just a moment. I started this conversation with them about 2 weeks into December. I sat down with all 4 of them and said, hey, I got this idea. What do you think? Do you think this would be good? And they kind of, they didn't just sort of, they helped shape this morning. And they even helped kind of write a statement about what this morning could potentially produce, or almost like a thesis statement. So I thought I might start by reading this sort of co-created piece that we wrote together. And it says, regardless of our relational season, every one of us shows up as deeply complex individuals, a beautiful array of experiences, growth, emotions, beliefs. There are also intersectional realities or power dynamics that play into how we function with ourselves and others. In some instances, we're fully aware of these dynamics, and in other instances, not so much. We trust that hearing what this looks like in a more intimate fashion for real people in real places and time is an opportunity for Watershed, an opportunity for us to reflect and grow both individually and collectively as a community. In becoming familiar with those we may not have yet met or who may live outside the perceived normal of our lives, we are presented with potential, the potential for our empathy, our awareness, and our love to expand. And this also presents the invitation to observe our own stories and beliefs about our relational selves. So in one sense, we begin to know our community at a deeper level, but we also become more in touch with ourselves in the process. And so I want to invite my friends to come to stage. This is Elizabeth, Dee, Mark, and Oliver. Would you give them a big hand this morning? Come on up here. So again, just to set the table, tons of relational experiences kind of setting here. Between me and Dee and Elizabeth, between me and Mark and Oliver, in the name of transparency, these 2 couples had not met until we started talking together. So that's been a really fascinating part of this, to watch them become relationally connected, but then also to hear them benefit from each other's ways of seeing the world with such intentionality as well. So I want to say thank you to the 4 of you. I know you're being asked to be transparent in a room full of people, some of which you've never met. That can't be intimidating at all, right? Nothing going on there. You're fine. You're fine. And here's the invitation for those of you who are either watching or sitting here in this space. Like, I would invite you to hold in your hands, on the one hand, like enormous amounts of curiosity, and then in the other hand, enormous amounts of reflection. So as they're being asked questions, or as they're responding to each other, or just being transparent, the practice that you could begin to develop this morning is, all right, how do I go into my interior space and begin to reflect on those same things? Where do I see my story in this? Because that's the other really powerful dynamic that I think often happens when people share parts of their lives and tell stories about what it's been like. Does that work? Yes, good. They're such a voluminous bunch, aren't they? All right, so David's supposed to be the crowd breaker. Like if you go to, he did not do a good job this morning, right? He did not get that done. Sort of, it didn't warm us up good. All right, so let's just start by creating some context. how did you meet? Like, who are you? How did you meet? How long did you date? Both couples are married. You've been married for a particular amount of years, so would love to hear about that. And why don't we start with you, Elizabeth? Like, set the table for us here.
Sure. So I'm Elizabeth Watson. This is my husband, DeAndre Watson. We started dating in 2012. I just moved back to the area after grad school, and we dated about 6 months, and then we broke up. That's it. Bye. No, so we just, it wasn't the right time for either of us. But we became really great friends. Ended up getting back together a little while later. And then we got engaged in 2014. I think it was 15. But we got back together in 2014, got engaged in 2015. And then, as we were planning our wedding, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So we got married. I went through treatment. So that was kind of hard. Then a few years later, I had open heart surgery. So that was also kind of hard. And then we had a baby. And that was hard, but better than all those other things. So we've just celebrated our 5-year wedding anniversary, but it's been a very full 5 years.
Yeah. I had the privilege of standing with Elizabeth and Dee the day that they were married. So that's a real... Why is that funny? Oh, the picture. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, sure. O'Neill marries you. It's a joke, is what I heard in all that. All right, so that's Dee and Elizabeth, Mark and Oliver. I think, Mark, you were going to kind of set the table for us?
Sure, and then he can chime in where needed. But we met in Memphis, Tennessee, back when... This is funny because somebody told me earlier in the production team that they were going through the pictures and they didn't recognize us. And I said, oh, yeah, thanks for making me feel old. Because this June we're kind of celebrating 22 years together, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we've been around a while. In Memphis. And so back then it was kind of the day of AOL and You've Got Mail. And you had those chat rooms, and so... And in a place like Memphis, that's kind of what you did. But, if you weren't trying to, just find somebody in a bar, you met people online. And so I was, we were all, I think, meeting people online. And he actually was coming along as somebody's wingman. And so me and that person met up, and there wasn't chemistry, but Oliver and I did have chemistry. And so then we continued to hang out together. And in that day also, it was just... Before there were equal rights for the gay community, and everybody was very focused in the community. Was very focused on that, and that's what Pride was all about, and actual protests, on the street. Like, let's get equal rights, and it was hard because we were looking for that person to be in relationship with and travel with and experience life with, and but knowing that you're not legal at that time, so it's hard. It was hard to find that person. And when you find them, somebody that thinks the way that you do, and you're wired that way, it was like finding a needle in a haystack. So just thankful. Yeah, and I can't imagine how the degree of difficulty that came along with that in the South, because the South can sometimes be a little more cruel, to put it, to understate it. So real quick, before we go any further. The two of you champion something called Kindred, and can we just take a quick 30 seconds, explain what that is? This is kind of a commercial of sorts about Kindred, but then also there's something you're doing moving forward monthly that I think would be interesting to hear about. Yeah, so Kindred actually has been around just over 5 years now, which is kind of cool. I had to look back on Facebook. Yeah, right? It's awesome. Yeah. Thanks. But Kindred started as our LGBT blog, and has kind of grown into just a community that reaches more people than I think we even know, and it reaches people that are actually not part of Watershed, but and it reaches all ages. It represents our LGBTQIA plus community, and regardless of whether you identify as one of those or you're an ally, we want you to be a part of that, or you don't want a label at all. If you don't have a label at all, that's you come and be a part. But in those 5 years, we've kind of we've actually kind of had like 3 evolutions. Sorry, it's a little more than 30 seconds. 3 evolutions of like Kindred 1.0, 2.0. And I think this year we're kind of in Kindred 3.0. And there's been a lot of developing and growing in what our community should be, what our LGBTQ community should be and do. And one of those initiatives this year brings about Coffee with Kindred, which is the second Sunday of every month. So in 2 weeks it'll be. And so we meet starting at 9:30, 30 minutes before service, right in the cafe room, right there in the hall, and come by and hang out with the most fabulous people at Watershed, right? we are awesome, right? And we're also doing a lot of other things. We're going to be doing retreats, day retreats. We're going to be doing, our regular social get-togethers. We're also going to be doing some volunteering this year. So we've got a lot of other initiatives that are part of that Kindred 3.0, kind of where we're going, and so many opportunities for people to plug in where it makes sense for them. So thanks.
Thanks. No, and it's okay that you went over 30 seconds. It's totally good. If you really want to meet people, like there's that environment, and there's going to be more environments as we move into the spring. So, kind of these mid-size opportunities for you to just, in a very relational space, get to know one another. It's on you, though, to show up at 9:30. They're going to be ready. They're going to have the coffee. It'll be a great time. Hope you can come. All right, so let's dive in. There was a period of time before the two of you as couples moved towards each other. I'd like you to spend just a minute or two talking about that pre-married, unattached season for yourself. And if there's a word that you could choose to describe how you were occupying that time in your life, what would that word be and why? And Dee, I'd like to start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So for me, the word that kind of came to the surface was guarded. And for me, I think part of that is probably a little bit of my upbringing. I had a single mom for a long time, and then from that point on, I think I'm a Enneagram 6, so like I'm really about like being loyal and being really consistent from that perspective. So for me, I was just in a bunch of long-term relationships, but I still was not overly vulnerable. And the thing that's a little bit interesting about my relationship with Elizabeth, obviously, we are in an interracial relationship for those you can't see, but
for any people blind,
exactly for those who are listening in on the podcast. So for that, like I had never not dated a non-black woman, and so this was not something I was taking casually by any means. And I used to interrogate our relationship very early on. And a really bad story is that, not bad, but I would basically show up at Elizabeth's place unannounced, and I would just basically just check and see if things were on the up and up, right? Because I'd never been in that type of an environment where I'd been with somebody who was of a different background, race, ethnicity than me, and so it was probably still a lot of that, those kind of emotions, kind of just feeling how I interacted and acted. So yeah, I was very guarded.
Yeah. Real quick, before we go on, and I apologize for this, one of the things that we're trying to do better at as a community is like being transparent and like in real time, like grab something that maybe happens and go, oh, wait a minute, that might have come out the wrong way. And I just said something, and I just want to name that I feel bad for what I just said leading into that. That might have come off as insensitive because it kind of was. So I want to apologize right out of the gate about the comment that I made about someone being blind. So can you guys kind of forgive me for that? I didn't want to keep going and not name that because then I would not be able to literally hear what you're saying. So there you go. I've said that. Sorry for that. If you need to see me afterwards, I'll be more than able to talk to you. All right, so you were guarded, all right? And then Oliver, what about you?
So for me, the first word that came to mind was the word dysmorphic. So it's a big word. So dysmorphic basically means a feeling of unease or discomfort, being out of place. So as Mark had said, during the time when I was unattached, being who I was, and getting to love somebody of the same sex or have relationships with people who were like me was considered illegal, criminal. I could be jailed for it. But my sense of discomfort was so strong that I was willing to forgo it all. You know, be considered a pervert, be considered immoral, be considered not a member of general society, because I wanted to give my love to another person. I wanted to give of the same gender. I wanted to create relationships with people who were like me, and I was willing to give it up. But that was the word that came to mind, dysmorphic.
So we got guarded, dysmorphic. Elizabeth, what about you?
So my word was annoying because
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
not related to Matt, but my life in other ways at that time was very full, and I had great friends, a great church community, great family, but I just wasn't. I was dating a lot, but I wasn't really holding people to the same standard that I was holding myself and other people in other parts of my life. So it was just very frustrating, very annoying.
Yeah, super. All right. Annoying, dysmorphic, guarded. Mark, how are you going to round us out?
My word is incomplete. I just felt really incomplete because the way I'm wired is to be with somebody 100% and be all in and be with that person. And so when I was not having that, or when I was in other relationships, or I was in not having that at all, just felt this, incompleteness. I mean, that's just the way to put it, because I want to be all in with that person and to know that they're all in with me, and we're in this thing, ever how many years. But to travel and experience life with, and to love and grow with, and work through all of those compromises that come, and the cultural differences, and moving across the country, and everything that comes with that. But to experience that life with that person, no matter what comes and goes, is just it gives me a completedness that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens, and it doesn't matter if we have a tiff or whatever. But we work through it, and we keep going, and because we're in this together, no matter what, for the long haul. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So the other night, when we were working through this, some of the things that we talked about was, this is important to name, because we have no idea how someone might be showing up in their particular season. But then the question surfaced: if you could say to your former self something, knowing what you know as your present self, back in that season, what would you say? So, Elizabeth, you want to get started?
Yeah, I would say relationships can be hard, but you don't have to be insecure and uncertain. If there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty, it might not be the right relationship. And because that's something that I found with Dee, is like, I'm never uncertain about his feelings for me.
Oliver, would you like to?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
What would you like to say to your former self?
I guess I'm going to have to tie it to the song, that we just heard. Don't give up. You're worthy. You're worthy of love. You're not evil. You're worthy. Don't give up, and hopefully for the people that I interact with, don't give up on me.
Thank you. Dee, do you have?
Do I have a? Well, I was just thinking about what I said the other night, and I think I said kind of take a deep breath and just give yourself a little bit of grace and relax a little bit. And I just think I would probably say the same thing. Just like it's not the end of the world. Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
It's not that serious. You'll be okay.
Yeah, Mark, I don't want to leave you out.
That's okay. For me, it's worth it. I find value in a relationship. Again, it's the way I'm wired to be with a person that I can pour everything into. But I guess I would say to myself that don't be afraid to put that work in. Don't be afraid to go into those uncharted, scary. I mean, it is scary. It can be really scary, but don't be afraid to dive into those relationships and some of those things that you may not know what you're getting into when you make a commitment to a person, that you're going to be there no matter what, but that it's worth it in the long run, because I think you create something really intimate, at least for us, that we feel is special and unique, and the longer we add on to it, I think it grows, and we appreciate it more.
One of the things I've processed with so many folks here who are in the season where it's in between something, or prior to something, or post something, is all the work and the energy that goes into being okay with yourself, regardless of what happens, in 5 years, 10 years, and like, what does it mean to say all those things, whether you have someone or not? Like to say, be patient with yourself, be courageous with yourself, be generous with yourself. So, the way that you were with yourselves, like I have to think that as you were moving towards each other, you had some sense of your feet underneath of you, which almost created a liberation of sorts to say, all right, I'm not moving towards this situation with any sense of desperation. Like I'm actually in a place of empowerment versus desperation. You're shaking your head. So I've heard you say versions of that in previous conversations. What was the thing that kind of leapt off the page for you when you started interacting with the other person? And I keep coming back to you, but I think I want to go to Oliver. I totally faked you out. Yeah.
Well, what I guess kept me grounded, I tell people this story for people who know us and how we got together. And during that time of unattachment, I will admit I was being a little narrow in how I wanted to build my relationships. I was looking for people who were like me, being very specific, being Filipino, and being even more specific, being a gay Filipino. Because I felt then that was the only way I could, the other people that I'd be working with in building my relationships with, they would get it. They would understand where I'm coming from. They would understand the trauma I've been through. But, then came Mark, where I was supposed to be the wingman. But, ultimately we ended up talking to one another, and I realized, I was wired the same way. We have different beliefs. We're different people, but at the core of it, we were very similar in our belief systems and our value systems, and that was very attractive to me. And we ended up that day, when we first met, I had work at 6 a.m., but we ended up talking till 4 a.m. in the morning. That was that groundedness, that attraction that came from it, because we had the same value system. He believes in family. He has a strong understanding or belief about what family plays in the relationship. He's very driven to be successful both in career and life. We're both spiritual. He's Church of God. I was Catholic, but we still believe that God plays a crucial part in our relationship or in any relationship. And then last but not least, because I was feeling so dysmorphic or a feeling of dysphoria, he provided extreme kindness, and that's exactly what I needed. So the value system, getting to realize that we were wired the same way, was big in building that relationship.
Mark, why don't you just go ahead and fill in the gaps there and how you kind of show up there?
For me, what drew me to Oliver was that he came across as a free thinker. And even though he comes from a very, very Catholic culture, family, country, and still considers himself Catholic today, he was not afraid to explore that path that he knew God was drawing him to be who he felt God wanted him to be. And so I've always admired that, and he's always been very open and free-thinking outside of that box to pursue God's purpose for his life and relationships and yeah.
So, just real quick, was that something you were walking in going, this is important, or was it something that surfaced and you went, that's important? Do you have a way of kind of remembering if there was an order of operations there?
I think that's always probably always was important, because I was dealing with my own faith journey as I was exploring who I was and coming out in those years as well, and that's a struggle. And so faith was and needed to remain important to me. Figuring out how I fit into that and where, I belong in that was going to be important with any person that I kind of attached myself to make sure that they were in that same mindset as well, to explore that and that keep faith a priority in no matter what we do. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about Kindred, is because I've been places where there weren't that space to exist and freely be who you are didn't exist at all. It just wasn't there. There was no space there for that. And as I mentioned earlier, coming up through those years, there was a fight to be accepted and a fight to say, we're not sexual deviants and we're not this and this and this, and that we should be treated equally with anybody else. And so having that space within our church and in my workplace and any of those kinds of places has always been important to me, to show anyone else that this space is accepting for you just as you are, label or not, doesn't matter. And so sometimes it's been me and one other person to show up for like an event or something, and then sometimes there's 24 of us, and it doesn't matter how many people are there, we will always keep it going, and it's just been part of my experience, I think.
Well, and it's I think this is always fascinating when you begin to reflect back on previous times in your life. It's like, what was that, some sort of inner voice that was saying these are the things to look for, or did something happen and at that moment you realize, man, I need to value that particular thing? And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, but I think the question is, what are you aware of as you're in that season of life, and then how does that look as you're engaging other people? Elizabeth, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think I have the benefit of knowing, how I felt when Dee and I first got together, and then when we ended up getting back together. And it's kind of funny, at least to me, because I don't think God works this way, but at the time I just prayed. I was like, God, please just let me find someone who's like Dee, someone who's thoughtful and serious. Like, just let me find someone who's like Dee. And then, there was an opportunity where we were both single at the same time, and I thought, thank you, God, this is even better. And like I said, I know God doesn't work that way, but it was like, all right, well, now I have to be all in, because this is something that I've really wanted, something that it was illuminated for me when we weren't together, that Dee is the type of person that you want to build a life with. So he's thoughtful, and he's kind, and he's considerate, and one of the things I really love about him is that we can have great conversations, and he's one of the only people that I know who takes in new information and can change their mind. I think that's just the sign of a really smart, thoughtful person, because I think it's so easy to just get kind of stuck in your views. But I see Dee grow and change every day. So
yeah,
I love that about you.
Yeah, that is unique in today's world, isn't it? Dee, how would you respond?
I'm about to tear up here. This is wow. Okay.
There's a little bit of pressure, man.
Yeah.
How you match that, right?
All these answers have been unbelievably amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
So everything resonates with me. I think the thing for me that stuck out with Elizabeth was just how compassionate she was with everything that she really pursued, whether it be her professional career, her family was a big thing for her. Similar to how Mark and Oliver talked about how important family was for them. But even her personal pursuits, her friends, she was always a great friend. But she really, truly made me feel loved. And it was to the point where I had to drop my guard down, and I could be vulnerable with her, and in a way that I don't think I could really be with anyone else. And I even experienced that here at Watershed, because I wasn't 100% aligned with this Watershed thing, to be 100% honest with you.
Me neither.
Yeah. So it was a different environment. I grew up in a Southern Black Baptist church. There were not a lot of black people here, and so I came here, and the entire experience was just very different. So, but I remember she was so hot on fire. We were having a conversation at the park, and she had just experienced either a retreat at Watershed, and she was just so excited about it. And you asked about whether or not some of the things as far as whether it was consciously aware of whether or not these things are kind of foundational for us. And I think for us, just similar to Mark and Oliver, like we had these foundational things that were things that we were looking for, whether we were consciously aware of them or not. And I think it just reverberated as far as, yes, I don't have to stretch or work in order to get this because we are basically going down the same road. We may not have the same perspective, we may not have the same thoughts about a lot of different things, but fundamentally, we are kind of going down the same path. And so the thing that really, again, I guess I'm kind of belaboring the point a little bit, but her compassion and her ability to not just be compassionate about things that she, were her strong suits or things that she really, were really strong about, but also the things that she were possibly her weaknesses or the things where the blind spots were also things I was really, really drawn to for her.
Mm-hmm. So that's all the gushy stuff, the moving, tearful stuff. Can we talk about maybe the unedited stuff? And I love the way that we all kind of worked on these questions together. So I want to read this one like verbatim. It says, are there some not so obvious dynamics, the unedited parts of your relationship with each other that you could describe? And I don't think everybody's going to take a stab at this, but feel free to fill in some blanks here if you want to speak up. Oliver, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think, what many people don't realize about how I interact, how we interact with each other, how we interact as a couple with each other is that we view our lives and we make our decisions based on these cultural or ethnic lenses. And I'll give a very good or recent example. So we went to Pigeon Forge for the holidays in the wintertime because we love Dollywood and we love what Dolly stands for. So even though I'm not a country fan, so he is, I am not. But we decided, it's the holidays. Let's treat ourselves to a dinner theater, and we ended up choosing the Hatfield and McCoy's dinner theater, which looked like a good example, a good idea back then. But as I came to see when we landed there, or we got to line up to go in, I nudged Mark and said, Mark, I'm just going to let you know I'm feeling a little uncomfortable here because I am the only person of color, In this entire everybody is a certain demographic, certain skin color, and made me uncomfortable. So for the rest of the night, my decisions, how I interacted with Mark, how I interacted with others, was colored by that cultural lens. And I constantly, it's something that I cannot take away. And, it happens to Mark too, because he is married to somebody who is a person of color. When he interacts in situations, he makes decisions based on who I am, because I can't change the color of my skin. I can't change being gay, So when he goes to the Philippines, it's reversed. Now he's the person of color, and the decisions I make, the decisions he makes with me, and the decisions that we make together are tainted by that, not tainted, but they're informed by that cultural and ethnic lens. And as Dee already also mentioned, I did exactly the same thing. The first time I stepped in Watershed, the first thing I did was I scanned and say, who is like me? So that alone, that step that I had to take to come here and then feel like I'm comfortable was informed by that cultural lens.
I think, and I've heard over the past 4 years, like, we always made the assumption that, well, of course we're accepting and including here. Of course these, we love everyone. And there's a verbal truth to that, but there's not an awareness truth to that. We assume that means people don't show up, or that people show up and they don't feel like they have to edit themselves, or that they don't have to scan the room. And I think it's so elementary, it's so foundational to the experience of someone who steps into a space where they are not the majority. That didn't land for me until about 3 years ago. So much of the change has been honest conversations like what you're describing. And so, first of all, thank you again, for those of you who have spoke so honestly to us. But then also, it highlights a universal truth that I see functioning in both of your relationships, where you have to check in with each other around particular things that you are woefully aware of. And I think it's real easy to go to sleep if you're with someone to assume that it's just fine and I don't need to check in. Like, if you really know the other person, you know yourself, then how do you create that ongoing healthy dialogue of, hey, how's that landing for you? I noticed this, I didn't notice that. So that the way that you've modeled that, and I've watched the two of you model that as well. How would you respond to the question? And again, let me state the unedited, not so obvious kind of dynamics, parts of your relationship.
So when I was thinking about this question, I don't know, it might be pretty obvious, but Dee and I are both very passionate. We're also stubborn. And so I think you can imagine how that might work in disagreements. But there was one, what it's taught us is just that we have to be really intentional about the way we enter those types of conversations. And I think that's just taken time for us to get better at. One of the stories that is very memorable for both of us was a disagreement that we had coming back from a road trip. So just imagine you're in a car. There's nowhere you can go. A great place to have a difficult conversation. It's really not. But it started off, it was about a movie, which seems very silly, but I said something that was just uninformed and unintentionally hurtful, but still hurtful. And it quickly became a conversation about race. And at that time, I was so defensive. And I was like, instead of listening to what Dee was saying about, like, you know, the history and the experiences of everything that we were talking about, I was just like, I can't believe you think that about me. And I made it really all about me. And I'm embarrassed now that that was my response. But I realized, like, we were just sort of talking in circles for a while, ended up pulling over at a rest stop in Alabama. We worked it out. It was fine.
I'm from Alabama. That's where we were going. We didn't just stop in Alabama, like, let's exasperate this conversation. We didn't do that. We're coming back from Alabama.
Yeah, we did not detour to Alabama. We were already there. So we worked that out. But I think that's just a great example of what not to do. And I think we're both realizing, and, you know, we learn every day, just that we need to listen to what people are telling us about their experiences. And I think that's even more so important now that we have a daughter. So she's mixed race. She's a black woman. She's a girl, but she'll probably be a woman. Yeah. Eventually, she'll grow up. Yeah, she's a baby. But that's something where, like, neither of us have had that experience. And so we need to be able to listen to her and understand, you know, what she's going through, you know, do the work and understand, you know, culturally, historically, what her experiences might be, but also really be open that when she tells us we've made a mistake, to listen and not make it all about us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add something real quickly? There's two other things about Elizabeth and I that people probably don't really get, is that we're both really sensitive. And we try to be well-intentioned, right? So as well-intentioned and as sensitive as we are, we also get it wrong with each other a lot. So that's where sometimes as I think it strikes so harder for us, because we're trying to practice intentionality in the process, but we still may not get each other, or we still may not get it. And so for those reasons, like, we also have to practice a lot of grace, because otherwise, like, and we have to kind of go back to our foundational, this is who we are and why we are here for each other, without it being so, you know, personally attacking or feeling like we're attacking each other, because it can be really difficult sometimes. So
yeah, no, and you kind of leaned into the next question, which is, what do you keep working on with each other? And so there's so many layers that can surface in a conversation like this. All right, this is what it's like for Dee and Elizabeth, and for Mark and Oliver. But then, what is it like for me and the significant other that I'm with? Or what is it like for me as I'm moving toward relationships and the sort of filters and lenses that I'm taking on to see myself and others. And there's also a picture of community here, because everything you just described in how the two of you show up for each other makes me want to weep, because that's the way I feel like we should be showing up for each other as a community. We walk in here with the edited versions of ourselves, and then we try to be in community with each other, and we're guarded, we're incomplete, like all those words that you described early on, in a myriad of other things, right? And so to be able to sit with that particular statement as a community is worth naming as we kind of move into the last few minutes of this. And I think, Mark, you were going to respond to this too. What do you guys continue to work on together?
Yeah, I was going to elaborate on what you were saying, because so much of what we do is all about trust. And so, when you don't see people that look like you, you don't know if you can trust that space. And we certainly hope that, when we're with a person, that we can trust them and trust who they are and what's happening. But our humanity does, we let each other down sometimes, and we have to learn and grow and everything, because I've been guilty of that too. And so, to keep that trust and keep it going. So anyway, I've been on that trust where I'm making my employer do that too lately. Like, I'm telling them, you don't know if I trust you 100% yet, right? This space is still changing. You're still doing things, and so you may not have 100% of me yet. So, but we're building trust every day, and that's an awesome thing. But we did the Enneagram a few years ago, which everybody knows, this relationship type of personality test, and I'm a 9 on that, and so I'm a peacemaker. And so one of the things we have to work on is that I'm a peacemaker, he's a 4, which is this individualist, and so I like things to be kumbaya and done and no issues, and when things are not peaceful or there's something disruptive, I am very disruptive. Like, I have lots of anxiety around it, and I want it to be. But as an individualist, sometimes he needs space to work out what he needs and everything like that. And I've had to learn that, and we've had to learn that about each other. That he knows I want things resolved, but he might need space to work on that. And so, as we communicate and compromise with one another, I've learned that compromise takes sacrifice sometimes, and so we sacrifice maybe what we want right then to know that, okay, he's got to take this self-care time, and so I need to allow that him to have that as we work through this. And so that's like an ongoing, regular thing, but we've kind of come into a good dance over the last few years where we just kind of know, and it kind of becomes unspoken a little bit, and so he knows I need something resolved, I know that he needs space, and we can keep peace going.
So we're doing really well on time. We got about 4 more minutes, I think. And I got to ask something that I know we've talked about a little bit. This is off the cuff, so don't get too afraid. I know, Mark, for a 9, you're terrified right now. So, but in some ways, you've sort of nodded to particular power dynamics that exist in your relationships with each other. I spent, it'll be 27 years coming up here in March. Thank you. 27 years. And I only recently, over the last 5-6 years, did I really start to understand that there are the sort of power dynamics, just period, but then also within my marriage, in the way that we function with our kids. Can you just comment on what's that like in your relationship with each other? How does that sometimes get fleshed out? How much do you talk about it? How much of a factor is it? Do you have a way of just...
when you first asked this question, I just immediately thought that our daughter has all of the power dynamics.
She has total power.
We all just flow to her. But I think, it's a lot of practice, intentionality as far as how we talk to each other, how we communicate, how we hold each other's perspective in mind, and coming to a space realizing that, just because we think a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way that it can be thought. I know for us, whenever we do not agree or disagree, I have to be very mindful and cognizant of my volume, right? Like, if you're just talking about a physical power dynamic type of thing, and it's not like I am, I don't really curse very much. I don't yell, but like the way my family speaks, and it's just a much more engaged, like, and I know that she doesn't like that, and so there's that physical part of it, but there's also ensuring that we're trying to take care of each other through the process, right? You're not trying to hurt somebody in order to win an argument or to figure out a compromise or to get to a safe space, like making sure that we're not harming each other in the process of the exchange. I think it's really, really helpful for us.
Yeah. Elizabeth, how would you?
Yeah, I think it's, Dee is like much taller than me. So when we talk about like that sort of like physical power dynamic, obviously that's clear. But, I think sometimes I can be, Dee says a real fast talker. So I think sometimes even when we talk about just the way that we're having a dialogue about something, like I have to be mindful of even just the way I'm coming into the conversation, like the things that I'm that are kind of spurring me, like I just want to say everything and then move on. I'm an Enneagram 7. I think it's described as enthusiast, but I would sometimes describe it as a chaos agent because I sometimes just want to like throw everything out there and then peace, I'm gone. But that's one of those things where when you realize you're bringing that dynamic, you have to figure out like that's not productive. That's not how Dee wants to engage in this discussion. So how can I like bring my honest self to this and also do it in a way that is considerate and is healthy? And that's just something that it just takes time, and you have to talk about it. Like that's not. I would love to not talk about anything. Again, 7. I'm just here for the party. Like I don't want to have difficult conversations, but I realize that if you don't have those difficult conversations, you will keep having the same issues over and over and over again. So it's worth it, even though I just want to have fun all the time.
Let me drill it down a little bit. I guess bring it down the ladder of clarity a little bit more. So in our family, we're a multicultural family. We have an Indian child, an Asian child, and a black child. And so Donna and I, when we're most aware of ourselves, we're constantly trying to take into consideration, all right, we are 2 white parents. I am a man, she's a woman, Jyoti's a woman, Mez is a boy still. Like, how much of that is an ongoing dialogue within your relationship, or is it just sort of like what is that? How does that show up for the 4 of you?
Well, I can answer it. And Mark, you alluded to this, Dee and Elizabeth, and then Mark kind of said it too. I mean, you have to come into these relationships, and not just our marriage, but any relationship with a certain level of intentionality. But as Mark already mentioned, it's through practice that it becomes the dance that you dance, right? In fact, I'm a consultant, and I always counsel the people I consult with that you have to be strategic or intentional, for you to go anywhere, and having that strategic mindset or intentional mindset will be beneficial not only for yourself but the relationships you're in. So the answer is it's both, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of build it. You have to be intentional and then keep on practicing on it, and then it becomes second nature. But one other thing.
Yeah, please.
I also want to call out, as Dee mentioned, we are far from perfect. Far. We have a long way to go, and we're 22 years into our relationship. We have a long way to go.
Well, you didn't tell me that before all this, so. So you're talking, we're leaning into more intersectional realities, I think, in all of that. And I wanted to at least mention it because, and I know, Dee, you and I have had hours of conversation with our D&I community around how does that type of awareness and love for one another, and how does that space get held here? And I don't, do you have something to add in all of that? Just keep going. I felt like, part of what, again, there's like all these multiple things we get to hold in our hands when something like this happens. There's, all right, that's how that looks between them. What does that mean for me? And then what does that mean for us? And my experience has been the more that we can put ourselves in these places of humility to really hear what it's like through the eyes of other people, then what you just described starts to take place. It is by far not perfect, but there's an intentionality and there's an intimacy that we get to experience with one another here in community. And so let me pray. Will you give these guys a wild round of applause? And just so you know, like, I threw stuff at them that I didn't tell them I was going to throw at them today, and they handled it like champs. And so, God, I just want to kind of put out there to you really the words of Oliver. Like, there is this divine dance that is this collision of our humanity, our trauma, our joy, our aspirations, our hopes, our recovery, our repair, our acknowledgement of our lives and what we bring into a space such as this. We long for a community that continues to help us see the way the world should be as you see it. We long for both outer authorities that help us see this in really powerful ways, but then also a strong inner authority that is fueled by your compassion, your love, your liberation, your transformation, your justice and mercy. And so, God, what an encouraging morning. Thank you for allowing us to see expressions of ourselves. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for coming. You have a great day. You're dismissed.